Mother-in-law, you're just not at an age to understand these devices anymore, Derek told me, snatching the cell phone right out of my hands in my own living room with a smile that turned my stomach. I am Gloria. I am 72 years old, and I was widowed 5 years ago by a man who never once raised his voice to me or treated me like I was useless. What my son-in-law didn't know was that the phone he held with such arrogance wasn't my only connection to the bank or to my widow's pension. He thought it held my only savings. It had all started a couple of hours earlier on what was supposed to be an ordinary Sunday. The Sunday routine in my house has been exactly the same for years. I wake up at 6 in the morning, brew a pot of coffee, and sit out on the porch to watch the yard. Richard, my late husband, planted a lemon tree near the back fence the same year we got married. Now the tree is massive, casting shade over almost the entire lawn and forcing me to sweep up dead leaves more often than I'd like. The air was crisp that Sunday. I took my time in the kitchen, pulled the roast from the fridge, rubbed it down with garlic, parsley and a little olive oil, and preheated the oven. I always liked having control of my kitchen. For 35 years, I was the treasurer of a county farmers' co-op one town over. I managed the ledgers, the vendor payments, the deferred checks, and the payroll for 100 employees. Nobody had to tell me how to run a double-entry ledger or how to balance a sheet. But to Derek, my only daughter's husband, I was nothing more than an old woman who barely knew how to turn on the TV. I heard the engine of Derek's car pulling up in front of my house at 12 o'clock on the dot. The roar of that engine always seemed excessive to me, just like everything else about him. A vehicle far too big for a guy who changes jobs every 2 years because his bosses just don't appreciate his talent. Footsteps echoed on the sidewalk. The front door swung open without anyone ringing the bell. Caroline, my daughter, has her own key. They blew in like the wind had shoved them through the door. "Hi, Mum," Caroline called out from the hallway, using that high-pitched voice she saves for when she's nervous or trying to cover up an awkward silence. She appeared in the kitchen, dropping her purse on the clean table. Dark circles bruised the skin beneath her makeup and her shoulders slumped. Caroline always had a soft voice, but since she married Derek 10 years ago, it hadn't just stayed soft. It faded to a whisper whenever he was in the room. "How are you, sweetheart?" I asked, kissing her cheek. Her floral perfume couldn't quite mask the stale smell of a locked car. Before she could answer, Derek strolled into the kitchen. He wore a plaid shirt that pulled a little too tight across his gut, wearing that smug expression that never seemed to leave his face. He didn't even say hello. He went straight for the fridge, yanked it wide open, grabbed a bottle of cold mineral water, and drank right from the plastic. I just stood there watching him, dish towel in my hands. "It's boiling in this house, Gloria," he finally announced, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "You should turn on the AC in the living room. At your age, heat stroke is dangerous." "The weather is lovely, Derek, and the windows are open," I replied in a deadpan tone. I never gave him the satisfaction of seeing me upset. "Whatever you say," he muttered, waving me off. He wandered into the dining room to turn on the TV. He flipped it to a sports channel, cranking the volume high enough that the crystal glasses in my display cabinet actually vibrated. Caroline looked down. She started slicing some bread on the cutting board. "Don't mind him, Mum. He had a rough week at the office. You know how he gets when deals don't close fast enough." "Funny how a tough deal gives him such an appetite," I remarked, quietly arranging the tray of potatoes to slide into the oven. "And what about you? How are things at the pharmacy?" Caroline is a shift manager at a chain drugstore. She works 12-hour days. She is the one paying the rent for their apartment, the one covering the payments on Derek's massive SUV, and the one, I assume, keeping that household afloat while he chases investments that never seem to pan out. "Fine, tired," she sighed, arranging the slices of bread in a wicker basket. "We did inventory on Thursday. My back is killing me. But Derek says he's about to close a deal with a cleaning supply vendor and I won't have to work overtime anymore." I nodded in silence. I had been hearing the exact same promise about Derek's imminent deals since Christmas 5 years ago. I kept my mouth shut. Experience had taught me that criticizing Derek in front of Caroline only made her defend him harder. It was as if the dignity of her marriage depended entirely on convincing her mother she hadn't chosen the wrong man. Lunch dragged on, with the usual tension disguised as normalcy. I served the roast. Derek grabbed the largest portion before I could even offer the platter to Caroline. He chewed with his mouth half open, talking over the blare of the television. "The economy is wrecked, Gloria," he declared, pointing a fork speared with meat right at me. "People don't know what to do with their money. The banks eat you alive with fees. You have to know how to move. I'm putting together a mutual fund with some partners right now. 20% monthly returns, a sure thing." "How interesting," I said dryly, cutting my food into small, precise pieces. "Magic returns always end up causing headaches." Derek let out a short, barking laugh. "That's the mindset of your generation, mother-in-law, with all due respect. You folks think stuffing cash under the mattress or leaving it in a dead savings account is safe. The world changed. Everything is digital. Now you have to know how to use the platforms." I glanced at Caroline. She was pushing a piece of potato around her plate, refusing to look up. "I do quite well with my methods, Derek. I have no debts, I pay my taxes on time, and I own my home." That last sentence seemed to irritate him. The house, the property Richard and I had built brick by brick, a 4-bedroom place with a sprawling backyard in a neighbourhood that had skyrocketed in value over the years. Derek always stared at the walls of my house like he was calculating the price per square foot. Sure, he conceded, wiping his mouth with a cloth napkin and leaving an obvious grease stain. "But let's be real. The pension Richard left you barely covers the basics. And with inflation, that money is worth less every single day." Caroline and I were just talking about that in the car. Caroline's fork clattered sharply against her ceramic plate. Her head snapped up, eyes wide. "Derek, we agreed we weren't going to talk about this right now," she whispered, a sudden panic bleeding into her voice. "What weren't you going to talk about, sweetheart?" I asked. I rested my silverware on the edges of my plate and folded my hands in my lap. Derek didn't give Caroline a second to explain. He leaned across the table, planting his heavy forearms entirely too close to my water glass. "About your financial setup, mother-in-law. Caroline worries. You live alone, you're getting up there in years. Bank apps change every single day. There are scams everywhere. Older folks losing everything because they click the wrong link. We want to help you." "I don't need help with my bank account. I go to the branch I use, the ATM. I pay my utilities online. I've never had a problem." "Don't take offence, Gloria, but the other day Caroline told me you forgot to pay your home insurance premium. She had to go down and pay it for you." I felt a cold spike in my chest. I looked at my daughter. She shrank back into her chair. It was true that last month I had asked her a favour to pay the insurance at a physical branch because the bank's system was down for maintenance, and I had a doctor's appointment at the exact same time. It wasn't a memory lapse, it was a specific favour, and she had handed it to her husband as ammunition. "I didn't forget, Caroline. I asked you to do it because I was sitting in the doctor's office. I gave you the cash the night before." Caroline swallowed hard. "Yeah, Mum, I know. I just mentioned it to Derek in passing." "It doesn't matter if you forgot or not," Derek interrupted, raising his voice to claw back control of the conversation. "The point is, it's a mental burden you shouldn't have to carry anymore. Caroline works too much. I'm building my companies. We can't be running around plugging the holes of your slip-ups. I say this with nothing but love. The most logical step is for me to manage your pension. You hand the account over to me, I handle your bills, I invest the surplus in my fund, and I give you a clean monthly allowance without you having to lift a finger." The silence that followed that pitch was thick, heavy, like the dead air right before a summer thunderstorm. The TV kept blaring the game in the background, the roar of the stadium bleeding into the dining room, but at our table, nobody breathed. I kept my eyes locked dead on Derek. He stared right back with that blind confidence of a man used to bulldozing people without hitting resistance. It was the exact same confidence he'd used to isolate Caroline from her friends. The same confidence he used to convince her to sell her little compact car just to buy that massive SUV he drove around. No, I said it simply. One clear, unadorned syllable. Derek blinked, thrown off by how fast the rejection came. Mother-in-law, you didn't even think about it. There's nothing to think about. I appreciate the concern, but the money Richard left me and my pension are managed by me. If the day comes when I lose my mind, I'll sign power of attorney over to my daughter, not to you. Derek's jaw clenched tight. A deep red flushed up from his shirt collar. He looked at Caroline, waiting for her to jump in and defend him, but my daughter sat petrified, staring at the breadcrumbs on the tablecloth like they were a treasure map. Fine, Derek said, forcing a smile that looked more like a snarl. Just don't complain later when your savings evaporate because you didn't know how to invest. I stood up from the table and started gathering the plates in silence. The meal was over. The mood was ruined as usual. I walked into the kitchen, dropped the dishes in the sink, and turned on the hot water. The steam fogged up my glasses a little. I took my time, washing every piece of silverware, every dish, scrubbing with the sponge until every trace of grease was gone. I needed to keep my hands busy. I needed to not say the vicious things crossing my mind. When I finished, I dried my hands and walked into the living room. Derek was sprawled out on my three-seater sofa legs, stretched out, staring at his phone. Caroline was still in the dining room, sitting there wiping down the tablecloth with a damp rag like a robot. I took a seat in the armchair by the window. I pulled my cell phone from my apron pocket. I needed to check my checking account balance. I wanted to make sure the electric bill had been drafted correctly that Friday. I unlocked the screen and my apps popped up. The bank icon, red and white, sat in the top right corner. I tapped it. The loading screen appeared. I adjusted my reading glasses. The app asked for my 6-digit passcode. I started typing, slowly, making absolutely sure I didn't hit the wrong number. My eyesight gets blurry up close sometimes, and flat touchscreens don't have the tactile raised keys of the calculators I used to run at the co-op. Suddenly a shadow fell over me. Derek had gotten up from the sofa without me hearing him. He stood right beside me, looming over my shoulder to look at my phone screen. "What are you doing, mother-in-law? Fighting with technology?" he asked, not even trying to hide the mockery in his voice. "I'm checking a payment. If you'll excuse me, I need to focus." "Let's see, let me help you. You take forever." Before I could react, before I could pull the phone out of his reach, Derek reached down and snatched the cell phone right out of my fingers. The movement was fast, rough, a complete violation of my personal space. I felt the rough scrape of his knuckles against my hand. I froze. I looked up. He took 2 steps back, holding my phone up, staring at the glowing screen. "Derek!" Caroline yelled from the dining room, appearing in the doorway. "What are you doing? Give my mum her phone back." "Relax, Carrie. I'm just showing her how easy this is." "Look, mother-in-law, you were putting the passcode in wrong. That's why it locks you out." "Give me back the phone right now," I said. My voice came out low, unshaken, with a firmness that left no room for debate. Derek ignored me. His thumbs flew across my screen at lightning speed. "Mother-in-law, you're just not at an age to understand these devices anymore," he said, and let out a loud, booming laugh that echoed off my living room walls. A raw, humiliating laugh. "I'll manage your pension starting today. It's for your own good. Look, I'm already in your account." My stomach knotted, not out of fear of losing the money, but from the sheer invasion, the absolute lack of respect in my own home. The way this man, who hadn't built a damn thing in his life, felt he had the right to take what was mine by force. "Derek, please," Caroline begged, walking up to him and tugging at his shirt sleeve. "Give it to her. Mum is going to get mad." He shook off his wife's grip with a sharp jerk of his arm. "Don't be annoying, Caroline. I'm setting this up. I'm linking her account to my wealth management app. That way, I can track the transactions from my phone. It's fast. A couple of test transfers to confirm the link, and we're done. You'll never have to go to the ATM for dirty cash again, Gloria. I'll bring you whatever cash you need for groceries every week, like an allowance. The word allowance hung in the living room air. He was reducing me to a child. He was stripping away my autonomy right to my face, hiding behind a supposed modernity he thought I couldn't grasp. I stayed quiet, absolutely still in my armchair. That is how I operate. It was never my style to scream or throw a tantrum or smash plates against the wall. Back when I worked at the co-op, if I caught a vendor inflating prices, I didn't call them up to curse them out. I let them deliver the goods, I signed the invoice, and then I blocked all future payments, notifying the bank of the fraud with all the attached documentation. The vendor only found out they were ruined when they tried to cash the check. Silence is a much sharper weapon than noise. I watched Derek. He was engrossed in the screen, his brow furrowed in deep concentration as he swiped through the menus of my bank account. He saw my balance. He saw my pension deposits. But he didn't see everything. Because the app Derek was looking at, the one linked to my everyday phone number, only held the account where the state deposited my widow's pension. An account I kept at the bare minimum needed for basic living expenses. What my son-in-law didn't know, what nobody in that room knew, was that 15 years ago, Richard and I had opened an account at a completely different bank under my name. An account where we parked the cash from selling a plot of land out in the county, my entire life savings from the co-op, and Richard's life insurance payouts. That account didn't have an app on this phone. That account wasn't meant for just anyone to touch. "How kind of you, Derek," I finally said. My tone was so flat, so devoid of emotion that Caroline looked at me in terror. She was waiting for me to explode. Seeing me calm only made the fear in her eyes grow. Derek glanced up from the phone for a second, flashing a smug grin. "See, we can work things out. I already changed your login password for security, made it one I'll remember. If you need to pay a bill, let me know. I'll handle it." He set the phone face down on the coffee table, like a teacher confiscating a dangerous toy. Then he rubbed his hands together and wandered back toward the dining room. "All right, I'm going to take a nap in the guest room for a bit. The food made me sleepy. Carrie, have a coffee ready for me when I wake up." And he left. He just turned his back, walked down the hallway toward the bedrooms, and pulled the door shut with a muffled thud. Caroline stood frozen in the middle of the living room. She looked at the phone on the coffee table. Then she looked at me. Her eyes were swimming with unshed tears. "Mum, I didn't know he was going to do that, I swear. We were just talking in the car about prices going up, and he said he wanted to help you." I didn't move from my chair. I looked my daughter up and down. I saw the knots in her shoulders, the way she wrung her hands together. It broke my heart to see her like that, reduced to the shadow of a mediocre man. But my pain for her wasn't going to stop what I had to do. Love does not mean tolerating abuse. And that afternoon, Derek had crossed a line that couldn't be erased with empty apologies. "It's fine, Caroline. Go make your husband's coffee." "Mum, you aren't mad." "No, sweetheart, I'm not mad. Go to the kitchen." Caroline nodded slowly, visibly relieved she didn't have to face an argument, and retreated to the kitchen. I heard the sound of the metal kettle filling with water. I heard the click of the stove igniter. I stood up from my chair in complete silence. I didn't touch the cell phone Derek had left on the coffee table. It was useless to me now. He had changed the password, linked the account, taken ownership of the device. Let him keep it. I walked to my bedroom. The house had sunk into a strange quiet, broken only by the distant murmur of the TV and the water boiling in the kitchen. I stepped into my room and opened the heavy oak wardrobe. On the top shelf, tucked behind winter blankets that smelled of mothballs, was an old shoebox. I pulled it down. Inside were my vital documents. I took out my original ID, I took out a gold debit card I never carried in my daily purse, and I took out a hardbound ledger notebook where I wrote absolutely everything down. I went to the coat rack and took down my grey wool coat. I slipped it on, slowly buttoning each button with precision. I grabbed my black leather purse, slipped the documents inside, and slung the strap over my shoulder. I left the room and walked down the hallway. As I passed the kitchen, I saw Caroline's back. She was pouring coffee into a mug. I didn't stop to say goodbye. There was nothing left to discuss with her at that moment. I reached the front door, gripped the cold brass knob, and turned the lock gently so the mechanism wouldn't click. I stepped out onto the porch and pulled the door shut behind me, making sure the deadbolt engaged perfectly. The afternoon sun hit my face. I took a deep breath of the crisp Sunday air. It was 2 in the afternoon. The main branch of my bank, the one down on Central Avenue, has an automated lobby and self-service kiosks that operate 24/7. But more importantly, I had the direct cell number of the branch manager, a man who knew Richard and who had known my financial history inside and out for 2 decades. And if there was one thing a former treasurer knew how to do flawlessly, it was locking down a system before the thief could even take their first step. I adjusted my purse strap on my shoulder and started walking toward the avenue at a steady clip, never looking back. In 1 hour, I would be sitting at a bank terminal, and when my son-in-law woke up from his nap and tried to open that app to steal what was mine, he was going to find a surprise he wouldn't forget for the rest of his life. The afternoon wind hit my face the second I crossed the gate of my front yard, but I didn't stop to button my coat until I was half a block away. The asphalt of the sidewalk was covered in the dry leaves the oak trees shed this time of year, and the crunch of my own footsteps was the only thing breaking the Sunday silence. At 72 years old, I've learnt that rushing is the first mistake of the desperate. I wasn't desperate. I was executing a procedure. I walked down Main Street with my eyes fixed on the corner. I kept my black purse pressed tight against my body, feeling the comforting weight of the hard-bound ledger against my ribs. In my day as treasurer of the co-op, I faced droughts that ruined entire harvests, trucker strikes that threatened to rot the goods in the warehouses, and vendors who tried to slide duplicate invoices past me, taking advantage of the chaos. I never solved a single problem by raising my voice. Problems are solved by cutting off the flow of money. And Derek, with his tight shirt and the arrogance of a man who has never broken a sweat to earn $1, had just put his hand in the wrong register. When I reached the corner of the main avenue, I saw that Arthur's newsstand was open. Arthur is a man my age, a widower too, who worked as a dispatcher at the same farmers' co-op for 20 years before opening his own business. He was organising some packs of coffee on the front shelf when he saw me walking by. "Good afternoon, Gloria," he greeted me, resting his ink-stained hands on the metal counter. "It's a miracle seeing you out walking on a Sunday at this hour. Wasn't your daughter visiting? I saw your son-in-law's SUV parked in front of your house." I stepped up to the counter slowly. The smell of sweet tobacco and printed paper brought back memories of the mornings Richard used to drop by to buy the paper before heading to the shop. "Good afternoon, Arthur." "Yes, they're at the house. Derek is taking a nap. I just needed some fresh air." Arthur let out a dry, joyless laugh and shook his head while wiping a rag across the candy display glass. "That boy has a talent for resting that I wish I had. He came by here an hour ago, right before lunch. He came to buy 2 packs of expensive cigarettes and an energy drink." "I imagine he paid in cash," I said in a deadpan tone, even though I already knew the answer. Arthur dropped the rag on the counter and looked me in the eye, lowering his voice out of pure instinct, even though there was nobody else on the street. "He told me to put it on his tab, Gloria. On your tab, I mean. He gave me some excuse about leaving his wallet in the glove compartment and not wanting to walk back. I gave them to him because, well, he's Caroline's husband, and I didn't want to disrespect you." I felt a cold pressure at the base of my neck. It wasn't about the money for the cigarettes. It was the absolute entitlement with which Derek used my name to cover his minor vices. The exact same entitlement he would use minutes later to seize my phone in my own living room. I opened my black purse, pulled out my worn leather wallet, and extracted a large bill. I placed it on the metal counter, sliding it forward with my index finger until it rested right in front of Arthur's hands. "Take it out of this, Arthur. And listen to me carefully," I said, keeping my voice low but with a clarity that left no room for debate. "From this moment on, my tab at this store is closed to anyone who isn't me. If Derek comes back asking for credit, tell him I spoke with you and strictly forbade you from extending credit in my name. If he gets mad, tell him to come take it up with me." Arthur picked up the bill, slowly nodding his head. He knew that tone of mine. He had heard it plenty of times at the co-op board meetings. "Understood, Gloria. Don't worry, I won't spot him a single piece of candy. Keep the change, please." "Thank you, Arthur. Have a good afternoon." I resumed my walk down the avenue. I had 3 blocks left to reach the bank branch. The sun beat down heavy on the grey sidewalks, but I didn't feel the heat. My mind was running through the architecture of the banking system that handled my pension. Derek had made a monumental miscalculation. He believed technology was the exclusive territory of the young, a language that old folks could only look at with fear and confusion. He was completely ignorant of the fact that bank computer systems were designed, structured, and approved by people of my generation. The interfaces change, they get more colourful, and you use them by tapping a glass screen. But the underlying logic, the lockdown rules, the security protocols, and the audit flows are exactly the same ones I applied to the co-op's general ledgers 30 years ago. I arrived at the front of the bank. The tinted glass doors were locked to the public, but the ATM lobby and self-service terminals were open. I pushed the heavy glass door, which gave way with a metallic hum, and stepped inside. The temperature drop was immediate. The air conditioning was running on high, leaving the room freezing and smelling faintly of ozone and floor wax. There was nobody else in the lobby. All 4 machines were open, blinking their green lights in the controlled dimness of the room. I walked over to the machine on the far right. It was the newest terminal, the one that allowed you to handle complex transactions without needing a human teller. I stood in front of the screen, pulled the gold debit card from my purse, the one Derek had never seen in his life, and slid it into the glowing slot. The machine swallowed it with a sharp mechanical clatter. The screen asked for my 4-digit PIN. I typed it firmly, covering the keypad with my left hand out of pure professional habit. The main menu unfolded before me. I ignored the cash withdrawal options and went straight to the linked accounts management panel. My primary account, the one holding a lifetime of savings and the cash from Richard's land sale, popped up on the screen with its balance untouched. A number that would have given Derek a heart attack out of sheer greed if he ever laid eyes on it. But my target wasn't that account. I navigated through the menu until I reached the secondary accounts under the same name. There it was, the checking account where the state deposited my widow's pension every first Friday of the month. I tapped the screen to view the latest transactions for that specific account. The list loaded in a second. My breathing stopped for a fraction of a second. There it was. At 1:45 p.m., barely 15 minutes after he had snatched the phone from my hands, Derek had initiated an outgoing transfer of $10. The transaction description read, "External digital wallet link." The recipient was an account under the name Derek Vance, hosted on one of those trendy financial apps that promise magic returns and operate outside the strict oversight of the Federal Reserve. He wasn't joking. He had actually set up his phone to drain my account. That $10 transfer was the bridge. Once he confirmed the money reached its destination without bouncing back, the logical next step would be to transfer the entirety of my monthly pension into his investment fund. And knowing his nap schedule, he would probably do it the second he woke up. Confident that I was just sitting in my living room armchair crying over my own uselessness, I didn't withdraw the money. Pulling the cash out and hiding it at home would have been a defensive maneuver, a way of dodging the blow. I wasn't there to defend myself. I was there to snap the trap shut. I pulled the gold card from the slot, tucked it into my wallet, and walked over to the wooden bench pushed up against the glass wall, out of reach of the ATM security cameras. I sat down, rested my purse on my knees, and pulled out my hard-bound ledger. I flipped through the handwritten pages until I hit the letter R. Robert Vance, branch manager. I've known Robert since he was a fresh-faced college grad who started as an account officer at the county bank. I was the one who taught him how to read the co-op's agricultural balance sheets so the bank would approve our credit lines to buy tractors. Today, Robert wears tailored suits and has a glass-walled office on the top floor of this very building. But he never forgot who helped him close his first major deals. I pulled an old cell phone from my purse. It wasn't a modern smartphone with a touchscreen. It was one of those small, rugged black bricks with physical buttons that only makes and receives calls. I bought it years ago to have a dedicated emergency line for Richard's family out of state. And nobody, not even Caroline, remembered I had it. I dialed Robert's personal number. The line rang 3 times before it clicked open. In the background, I heard the typical noise of a family Sunday. Kids laughing, a dog barking, and the metallic scrape of a barbecue grill. "Hello," Robert said. His voice sounded relaxed, completely different from the stiff tone he used Monday through Friday. "Robert, it's Gloria. I'm so sorry to interrupt your Sunday." There was a second of silence on the line, followed by the sound of footsteps walking away from the background noise. When Robert spoke again, the commotion was gone. He had stepped into a quiet room. He knew that if I was calling his personal cell on a Sunday, it wasn't to wish him a happy birthday. "Gloria, please, it's no interruption at all. What a surprise to hear from you. Did something serious happen? Are you all right health-wise?" "My health is perfect, Robert. I'm calling about a banking irregularity. I need you to log into the system from your contingency laptop." I heard the jingle of keys and the sound of a door clicking shut. "Tell me what happened, Gloria. I'm listening." My son-in-law, Derek Vance, took my personal cell phone from me by force an hour ago in my own home. He changed my banking app password without my consent. I just checked my transaction history at the self-service terminal, and I see he made a $10 test transfer to link my pension account to a digital wallet in his name. He intends to manage my pension against my will. Robert let out a curse under his breath, a heavy word he quickly tried to cover up by clearing his throat. "That son of a bitch. Excuse my language, Gloria, but that is a major felony. Do you want me to freeze the pension account so he can't move a single dime? I can do it in 2 minutes." I kept my eyes locked on the empty street through the bank's glass wall. "No, Robert, freezing my account only stops the bleeding temporarily. Tomorrow he could force my daughter to come down to the branch with some excuse. I need you to trigger the security protocol for digital identity theft, level 3. Dead silence fell over the line. The only sound was Robert breathing. He knew exactly what I was talking about. Level 3 wasn't a simple preventative freeze. It was a weapon designed by the fraud department to neutralize entire networks of scammers. Gloria, if I trigger a level 3 fraud alert, the system doesn't just freeze your pension account. The algorithm tracks the IP address and the digital footprint of the device that made the test transfer. Your son-in-law's phone will be flagged in the national banking database as a device used for phishing and elder fraud. "I know," I replied, my voice completely flat, without a drop of hesitation. "That means," Robert continued, shifting into a strictly professional tone, "that as an automatic security measure, the Federal Reserve will order a preventative freeze on all accounts, credit cards, and digital wallets installed on that device or associated with the name Derek Vance. He will be financially paralyzed. He won't be able to buy a cup of coffee with a card until he shows up in person with a lawyer to explain why he tried to hijack a pensioner's account." I think that's an excellent security measure for the times we live in, Robert. The world changed. Everything is digital. Now you have to know how to use the platforms. Just like my son-in-law says. Robert let out a short, almost imperceptible laugh, heavy with dark respect. "You are still the exact same strategist you always were. Gloria, give me 5 minutes. I'm booting up the office laptop in my study. I'll report the event as a red alert cybersecurity breach detected by internal monitoring. You don't have to do anything else. I appreciate this immensely, Robert. I'll drop by your office on Tuesday and bring you a jar of those canned peaches you like. Not necessary, Gloria. It's my job to protect our clients. In 5 minutes, that boy's phone is going to turn into a very expensive paperweight. Take care of yourself. I hung up the call. I dropped the old phone into the bottom of my purse right next to the ledger and the documents. I stood up from the wooden bench, smoothed out the wrinkles in my grey coat, and walked out of the branch. The warm afternoon air wrapped around me again. It was 3:15. Derek's nap was about to end. I decided not to walk straight home. I walked 2 extra blocks to the bakery by the square, which is always open on Sunday afternoons. There was a short line. I waited my turn patiently, watching the kids play on the park swings. When my turn came, I ordered a pound of freshly baked French bread and half a dozen fresh pastries. I paid in cash, took the brown paper bag that radiated a comforting warmth, and started the walk back home. I needed to arrive holding something entirely ordinary in my hands. Normalcy is the best camouflage for devastation. The walk back felt shorter. As I got closer to my street, I noticed that the front door of my house, the very same one I had locked with extreme care, was cracked open. I stepped up the 2 porch steps without making a sound. I pushed the wooden door. The mood in the living room was radically different from the one I had left behind. The heavy calm of Sunday digestion was gone, replaced by an electric tension. Derek was standing in the middle of the dining room, pacing in tight circles like a caged animal. His shirt collar was unbuttoned, and his face was flushed, beaded with a cold sweat that had nothing to do with the weather. He was holding his own cell phone in his right hand, jabbing the screen with his index finger so hard it looked like the glass was about to shatter. Caroline was sitting on the edge of one of the dining chairs, hands clamped between her knees, crying silently. Her makeup was smeared, leaving 2 dark tracks under her eyes. I stepped into the hallway, pulled the door shut behind me with an audible click, and walked over to the table. I set the bag of bread down on the clean tablecloth with absolute unhurried calm. Derek stopped dead in his tracks when he heard me. He snapped his head up and pinned me with a look full of pure rage and total confusion. "Gloria!" he yelled, taking 2 quick steps toward me, closing the distance in a threatening rush. "Where the hell have you been?" I took off my grey coat with slow, deliberate movements, folding the garment over the back of my chair before I answered. I looked him dead in the eye, refusing to back up a single inch. "I went for a walk. Derek and I stopped by the bakery. I thought you 2 might like some fresh pastries with your coffee when you woke up from your nap. Did you sleep well?" My son-in-law's jaw locked so tight the muscles in his face twitched. He raised his phone and shoved the glowing screen in my face, though I didn't need to see it to know what it said. "Don't play dumb with me, mother-in-law. What did you do? Who did you call?" "I don't understand you, Derek. What are you talking about?" I asked, using a tone of flawless courtesy. The exact tone he hated, because it gave him no edge to grab onto for a fight. "My app," he roared, shaking the device in the air. "I woke up, tried to log into my account to check some investments, and the system bounced me. It tells me my user profile is locked for security reasons. I thought it was a network glitch. I tried to open my other app, my savings, and it's locked too." I looked at Caroline. She sobbed, covering her mouth with her hand. "Mum, Derek tried to pay a car insurance premium from his phone, and a red warning popped up. It says all his accounts are frozen." I turned my attention back to Derek. I tilted my head slightly, faking a look of maternal concern. "How awful, Derek. You were just telling me at lunch that there are scams everywhere. You probably clicked the wrong link. These modern apps are very tricky. Sometimes you tap the wrong button and you lose everything." "I didn't tap the wrong button," he shouted, losing his composure completely, his voice pitching high with desperation. "I called the bank's automated line. The machine told me my cards were disabled due to a fraud protocol detected on my device." "Fraud, Gloria? Me? He ran his free hand through his hair, messing it up. Panic was starting to beat out the anger. A man who lives on appearances and moving other people's money is absolutely nothing without access to his accounts. I have nothing to do with your business, Derek. You're the financial expert in this house, right? You're the one who manages the funds, the one who knows how to move. I'm sure you can fix it first thing tomorrow. Derek ground his teeth. He took another step toward me, invading my space, trying to use his sheer size to intimidate me, exactly like he had done when he snatched the phone from my hands hours ago. You did something, he hissed, dropping his voice to a threatening growl. You left this house and you went and did something. I saw the test transfer. It went through perfectly. The account was linked, and half an hour later, my phone turns into a dead zone. You called the bank and reported me. I didn't flinch. I kept my arms relaxed at my sides. The smell of hot bread filled the space between us, an absurd contrast to the violence bottled up in the room. I didn't report anyone, Derek. I don't have the power to freeze your personal accounts. I'm just an old woman who barely knows how to turn on the TV, remember? He froze. My own words, the ones he used to humiliate me, were bouncing back at him like a ruthless mirror. He opened his mouth to scream at me again, but the ring of the landline phone cut him off. The wall phone hanging in the kitchen started ringing with its sharp mechanical trill. Caroline jumped in her chair. Derek whipped his head toward the kitchen, eyes wide. Nobody called the landline on a Sunday afternoon unless it was an emergency. I walked slowly toward the kitchen, brushing right past Derek without even grazing him. I picked up the receiver and brought it to my ear. Hello, I said. Gloria, it's Robert, the manager's voice said, sounding entirely professional now. Sorry to bother you again. I was just calling to confirm that the cybersecurity department has issued the automated report. I'm listening, Robert. Derek stepped up to the kitchen doorway, holding his breath to listen to my half of the conversation. The hijacking attempt was logged, Robert explained. The system detected that an attempt was made from Derek Vance's mobile device to drain a pensioner's checking account. Since it's a federal crime, the bank has already forwarded the automated report to the district attorney's office for attempted financial fraud against a senior citizen. I'm letting you know so you're prepared if they contact you to ratify the charges. I felt a deep, anchoring peace settle into my chest. The machine was in motion, and there was no human way to stop it now. I understand perfectly. Thank you for your diligence. Good afternoon. I hung the receiver back on the cradle with a sharp click. I turned around. Derek was standing in the doorway, his face pale, completely drained of colour. Who was that, Gloria? He asked. His voice had zero arrogance left. All that remained was the raw fear of a man who just stepped on a landmine. I looked him up and down, taking in his sweaty shirt, the useless phone in his hand, his defeated posture. It was the bank's automated system, Derek, I said with an irony so dry it practically cut the air. It seems the technology detected an attempt to rob a pensioner from a phone registered in your name. And you know how these modern platforms are. Once they flag you as a scammer, there's no going back. Derek took a step backward like my words had physically punched him in the chest. His eyes, which always looked down at me with that mix of chronic boredom and disdain, were bulging, now locked on my face, begging for some sign that this was all a sick joke. But I don't joke about money, especially not mine. The silence that settled into the kitchen was absolute. So heavy that the hum of the old refrigerator sounded like an aeroplane engine. My son-in-law's face went from dead pale to a blotchy, irregular red, the exact colour blood turns when blood pressure spikes from sheer panic. He held up his useless phone, stared at it like the machine had betrayed him, and then pointed his index finger right at me. His fingernail was shaking slightly. "You're crazy," he said, his voice cracking hoarse, dropping the whole businessman act entirely. "You don't understand what you just did. It's a system error. It has to be a system error. I didn't steal anything from you." I didn't move from my spot by the counter. I grabbed the brown paper bag holding the French bread and the pastries. I rolled the top down to keep the heat in and set it on the cutting board. My movements were slow, deliberate. I wanted him to see that his desperation didn't raise my pulse by a single beat. The system doesn't make mistakes when it tracks where an order comes from, Derek, I answered with the exact same monotone voice I used at the co-op to read the annual balance sheets. You took my phone by force. You changed my security passcode. You linked my account to your digital wallet, and you made a test transfer. All of that leaves an indelible digital footprint. The bank simply put two and two together. It was to manage your bills, he screamed, slapping his hand at the air. I told you in the living room. I warned you I was going to do it. Caroline, who had been sitting petrified in the dining chair, stood up slowly. She walked toward the kitchen doorway, dragging her feet like she suddenly weighed 200 pounds. Her makeup was smeared, leaving 2 dark tracks under her eyes, and she had the hollow stare of someone who'd just watched a load-bearing wall collapse inside her own house. Derek, my daughter muttered, her voice barely a thread over the hum of the fridge. You were going to take my mum's money. You were going to drain her pension account. He whipped around to face her roughly, searching for a lifeline, someone he could manipulate. No, Caroline, for the love of God, he pleaded, stepping toward her with his hands open in a fake gesture of begging. I was going to invest it, I swear. There's an investment fund closing first thing tomorrow. I needed liquidity to buy into the pool. It was a bridge loan. In 15 days, I was going to give your mother her capital back with a 20% return. It was for us, Carrie, to pay the late payments on the SUV. Hearing the phrase bridge loan, my mind inevitably flashed back to the past, dragged down by the weight of a memory I had kept locked up for 5 years. It was exactly in November on a Tuesday afternoon. Caroline had shown up at my house, crying, eyes swollen, holding the keys to her little compact car in her hand. Derek had convinced her to sell her vehicle, the one she had bought herself with her very first savings from the pharmacy, to use the cash as a bridge loan, to put a down payment on the luxury SUV he drove today. I sat with her in this exact same kitchen, brewed coffee, and listened to her justify it. It's just that Derek needs a representative vehicle for his client meetings, Mum. He promised me that in 6 months he'll buy me a brand new car with his commissions. 5 years had passed. Caroline rides the bus for 2 hours every single day to get to the pharmacy, freezing in the winter and roasting in the summer, while Derek cruises his SUV downtown. That afternoon, as I wiped my daughter's tears with a paper napkin, I knew the man sleeping in her bed was a professional parasite. I didn't say anything to Caroline, so I wouldn't push her closer to him. But the very next morning, first thing, I went to the bank and opened the secret account. I knew the parasite sooner or later would try to feed on me. The gold card was born from that memory, from the sight of my daughter crying over a car she never got back. I snapped back to the present. Caroline was looking at her husband like he was a total stranger. The sound of his own excuse seemed to have ripped a veil off my daughter's mind. The late payments on the SUV, Caroline repeated, furrowing her brow. Derek, you told me the SUV was paid up. You asked me for half my paycheck last month, specifically to pay the insurance and the registration. Derek's face fell apart. The lie had crashed head-on into reality at the absolute worst possible moment. A deal got complicated, Caroline, he exploded, losing his temper, pointing at her with pure rage. You don't understand anything about finance. That's why we're in the mess we're in. If your mother wasn't a hysterical, paranoid old woman, tomorrow we'd have the money multiplied. But no, the lady prefers to call the bank and ruin my life. He took long strides toward the wall phone hanging right next to me. I stepped aside, yielding the space with ice-cold courtesy. Derek ripped the receiver off the hook with violence, almost tearing the cord from the base, and started dialing the bank's customer service number, the 1-800 number printed on the back of every card. He pressed the plastic against his ear, breathing through his mouth, sweating buckets. The plaid shirt clung to his back in dark, wet patches. The earpiece speaker was loud enough that Caroline and I could clearly hear the metallic, pre-recorded voice of the automated system. Welcome to the telephone banking network. Please enter your social security number, followed by the pound key. Derek punched the numbers in furiously. There was a 3-second pause. Elevator music played briefly, followed by a sharp click. We regret to inform you that your social security number has been preventatively disabled by order of the Federal Reserve Cybersecurity and Fraud Compliance Department. All linked accounts, credit cards, debit cards, and investment profiles have been frozen under a Level 3 protocol. Please proceed to your nearest branch during business hours with legal representation. Thank you for calling. The call disconnected on its own. The dead dial tone filled the kitchen. Derek froze with the receiver glued to his ear. The auditory confirmation of the disaster had destroyed his last shred of hope that I was lying. His financial world, the house of cards he had built, with lies, unpaid credit lines, and other people's money, had just been demolished by a bank security algorithm. He hung up the phone slowly. He didn't look at me. He stared at his own hands. The same hands that hours earlier had arrogantly snatched my cell phone away. The look of shock on his face, his sheer disbelief against the iron wall of a system he couldn't bully by yelling, brought up the second memory of the afternoon. A direct flashback to my years as treasurer of the Farmers' Co-op, a decade ago. There was a contractor, a massive guy named Frank, who hauled grain from the silos to the port. Frank had a habit of inflating his mileage on the shipping manifests. When I caught the discrepancy, I didn't go out to the loading dock to fight him. I simply adjusted the payment system for the month, deducted every stolen dollar, and locked his vendor account. Frank came kicking down my office door, screaming profanities, threatening me with million-dollar lawsuits and swearing he'd ruin my reputation. I remember looking at him over my reading glasses exactly the way I was looking at Derek right now and sliding the general ledger across my desk. "Sync me with my own numbers if you can, Frank," I told him. The contractor ended up doing time for tax fraud 2 years later. Loud men always underestimate the power of silence and flawless paperwork. They think fear is the only currency that matters, never realizing that precision is far more lethal. "My cards," Derek muttered, talking to himself. "The auto draft for the rent, the health insurance, the crypto apps, everything is in my name. Everything is linked to that phone." He turned toward me. The rage was gone, replaced by absolute panic. The raw terror of an animal feeling the steel trap snap shut on its leg. "Gloria, please," he said. It was the first time in 10 years I had heard him say the word please without a drop of sarcasm. "You have to call that manager. Robert, you know him. Call him right now. Tell him it was a mix-up, that we were just messing around, that I was setting up your account with your permission and the system misread the transaction." I stared at him, folding my hands over the apron I still hadn't taken off. The system doesn't misread Derek. The system logs facts. And the fact is, you took my phone by force, you changed my security passcode, and you transferred money to your account. That's not messing around. That's called theft. "But I didn't take anything. It was $10 miserable, he screamed, the desperation making him lose his pleading tone. "You can't ruin my life over $10. "I'm not ruining your life over $10. I'm stopping you before you ruin mine over my entire life savings. I'll give you the phone back here." He shoved his hand into his pants pocket, pulled out my cell phone and slammed it down on the kitchen counter with a dull thud. The device that had been his trophy hours ago was now burning his hands. "I don't want it, Derek. It's useless to me now. The line is compromised. Tomorrow, I'll go buy another one with a brand new number." Caroline took a step forward. Her eyes were locked on the phone sitting on the counter. "Mum," my daughter started to say, but her voice broke. She rubbed her arms like she was freezing, even though the kitchen was warm from the afternoon sun pouring through the window. "If Derek has his accounts frozen, we won't be able to pay the apartment rent this week." We're going to get evicted. That was the low blow. The human shield. Derek always used Caroline as a blast wall when his deals tanked. If he went down, he made sure to drag her down with him so people would feel sorry and forgive him by extension. I looked at my daughter with deep sadness, but I didn't let my posture waver. Loving firmness is the only cure for willful blindness. The lease for your apartment is in your name, Caroline. You have your own payroll account at the pharmacy. You make your own money, working 12 hours a day. If you stop paying the loan on your husband's SUV, you'll have more than enough money to cover the rent. Derek let out a hysterical laugh, grabbing his head, pulling his hair violently. Of course, that was your plan from the start, he shouted, pacing in tight circles in the small kitchen space. You always hated me. You always wanted to separate me from Caroline. You found the perfect excuse to leave me out on the street and turn my wife against me. You're a snake, Gloria. A snake dressed up as a helpless grandmother. The third memory hit me right then. It wasn't a distant memory, but one from just a few hours ago. That very morning, early Sunday, I was sweeping the lemon tree leaves in the backyard. Richard had planted that tree. Richard, a man who worked from sunup to sundown in his auto shop, who came home with his hands stained black with grease, but who never touched a single cent of my co-op paycheck. Because he said a woman's work is sacred and her money is hers. Richard taught me how to drive. He taught me how to change a tyre. He taught me that respect isn't demanded, it's built. I remembered the way Derek had walked into my house today without ringing the doorbell, yanking the fridge open like he owned the place, complaining about the heat, demanding the AC, cranking the TV volume until my windows rattled. I remembered the word allowance. He had offered me an allowance out of my own money. The humiliation wasn't an accident. It was a method. And against a method of destruction, the only thing that works is a method of defense. I don't hate you, Derek, I replied with a calm so absolute it seemed to rattle him more than an insult. Hate takes a lot of energy, and at my age, I prefer to spend my energy taking care of my plants. I'm simply defending myself. You walked into my house thinking I was a piece of old furniture you could empty the drawers out of. You were wrong. You are going to call the bank, he demanded, slamming his closed fist on the granite counter. The coffee mugs Caroline had poured hours ago rattled in their saucers. You are going to call and you are going to drop the charges, or I swear to God I will sue you for defamation. I have lawyers. I have contacts. Your lawyers charge a fee, Derek, and you don't have a way to pay for so much as an initial consultation because your accounts are frozen. And as for your contacts, I highly doubt they want to get dragged into a federal investigation for defrauding a widow. Derek opened his mouth to reply, but no sound came out. He realised in a fraction of a second the perfect trap he had walked into out of pure arrogance. He had no cash because I had cut off his tab at Arthur's store. He had no access to his cards, no access to his digital savings. He was a financially dead man, and the key to the padlock was held by the woman he had just called useless. He took a deep breath, trying to switch strategies. Aggression hadn't worked. Panic hadn't worked either. He tried pity. Gloria, listen to me. If this goes to the DA, they'll indict me. They could hold me in pre-trial detention for flight risk or obstruction. You don't want to see your daughter's husband in jail, right? Do it for Carrie. Look at her. You're destroying her. I turned my head to look at Caroline. My daughter was leaning against the doorframe, crying silently, thick tears rolling down her chin. But she wasn't crying out of fear. She was crying out of exhaustion. The sheer exhaustion of propping up a coward for 10 years. I walked over to her, stopping inches away. I reached out and stroked her cheek, wiping away a tear with my thumb. Sweetheart, I told her, using the soft voice I used when she was a little girl and fell off her bike. For 10 years, I've watched you shrink yourself. I've watched you lower your voice, slash your budget, sell your things, and work until your back aches. All to keep up the illusion that he is a successful businessman. I am not destroying him. He destroyed himself the second he decided to cross the line of the law. The question you have to ask yourself today isn't what I'm going to do. The question is, what are you going to do tomorrow when the police show up looking for the phone he used to try and steal your mother's pension? Caroline closed her eyes and let out a choked sob. She nodded slowly, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement, but heavy with crushing weight. She was waking up. The pain was immense, but it was the pain of the cure, not the disease. Derek saw that nod. He saw his wife, his safety net, his personal ATM slipping right through his fingers. "You're both crazy," he roared, backing out into the hallway, tripping over a dining chair. "You both deserve to end up alone. I'm leaving this house. I'm going to find my lawyer, and when I come back, I'm going to put you both out on the street." He spun around and took clumsy, heavy strides down the hall. I heard his shoes hitting the wood floor, followed by the sound of the front door ripping open and slamming shut with a force that rattled the picture frames on the walls. A second later, the engine of his massive SUV roared out on the street. The tyres screeched against the asphalt as he peeled out at top speed, running away from his own disaster, convinced he could still find an exit out there on the Sunday streets. Caroline and I were left alone in the house. The silence came back, but this time it wasn't a tense silence. It was the clean quiet left behind after a storm rolls through and washes away the piled-up trash. My daughter wiped her face with the back of her hand. She looked at me with bloodshot eyes. "He left, Mum. He went to burn gas he's not going to be able to pay for when he has to fill the tank." Caroline. I walked back to the counter. I grabbed the brown paper bag and pulled out the French bread still warm and the pastries. I arranged them in a wicker bread basket. Then I took the 2 mugs of cold coffee sitting on the counter, poured them down the sink, and turned on the faucet to rinse them out. "Sit down, sweetheart," I told her, pointing to the kitchen chair. "I'm going to brew fresh coffee." "Do you need to eat something?" Caroline obeyed. She sat down at the table, resting her elbows on the wood, staring at the bread basket like it was a magic trick. While I filled the metal kettle with water and turned the stove burner on, I looked out the kitchen window. The sun was already dipping behind the treetops in the backyard. The lemon tree cast a long, dark shadow across the lawn. The afternoon was coming to an end. I knew perfectly well that Derek's getaway was just the thrashing of a drowning man. He wasn't going to find any lawyer willing to work on an IOU on a Sunday afternoon to defend a guy with frozen accounts under suspicion of bank fraud. He was going to drive that SUV in circles. He was going to try and run his cards at some gas station. He was going to get declined. He was going to feel the public humiliation he tried to force on me in the privacy of my living room. And when the reality of his financial isolation became unbearable, he would have to come back. He would have to show his face to the only authority that could unlock the hell he had walked into. The water in the kettle started to boil, letting out a soft, steady whistle. I turned off the burner, prepped the filter, poured the hot water over the coffee grounds, and let the bitter, comforting aroma fill the kitchen, completely washing out the smell of sweat and fear Derek had left behind. I poured the steaming coffee into clean mugs. I carried one to the table and set it in front of Caroline. Then I sat down across from her, took a pastry and took a small bite. Tomorrow would be Monday. The banks would open their doors to the public at 10 in the morning. I knew Robert Vance would be in his office with the printed cybersecurity report sitting on his glass desk. And I knew that Derek, without a dime in his pocket and with the terror of a DA subpoena breathing down his neck, would have no choice but to show up at that branch. What Derek didn't know, while he burned his gas driving through the empty city streets, was that I wasn't going to wait for him at my house. I was going to be sitting in the bank lobby in my grey coat with my hardbound ledger, ready to have the final conversation in front of the people who mattered. The net was already cast, and the fish, blinded by his own arrogance, was swimming straight to the bottom. The Monday morning dawned freezing cold, with that thick frost that leaves the grass white and crunchy under your shoes, warning that winter was just around the corner. I woke up at 6 sharp, exactly as I have done every single day of my life for as long as I can remember. Routine has a healing power. It anchors you to the ground when everything else feels like it's shaking. I walked to the kitchen, clicked the burner on, and put the kettle on for coffee. The quiet in the house was deep, but it wasn't a silence loaded with tension anymore. It was loaded with resolution. Caroline had slept in her old bedroom, the same one she had before she married Derek. Last night, after her husband fled in the SUV, my daughter had collapsed in the kitchen chair, crying until she was completely out of tears. I let her let it out. I didn't give her cliches, and I didn't try to comfort her with white lies. I made the bed with clean sheets that smelled of lavender, and tucked her in like when she was a little girl with a fever. Sometimes the fever of the soul just needs to be sweat out in a childhood bed. While the water heated up, I heard the floorboards creaking in the hallway. Caroline appeared in the kitchen doorway. She was wearing a light grey wool sweater of mine that was a little too big on her. Her eyes were puffy and her hair was tied up in a messy bun. But her posture was entirely different. She wasn't slouched anymore. There was a new straightness to her shoulders. The straightness of someone who has hit rock bottom and realised the ground is solid. "Morning, Mum," she said, her voice a little raspy from crying the night before. She walked over and kissed my cheek, a gesture she hadn't done that naturally in years. "Good morning, sweetheart. Sit down. The water's almost ready. Were you able to sleep at all?" "More than I thought," she admitted, sitting at the table and wrapping her hands around the empty mug I set in front of her. "I woke up a couple of times expecting to hear the engine of Derek's SUV, but he didn't come back. I checked my phone. I have 20 missed calls from him between 2 and 4 in the morning and a ton of voicemails." I poured the first cup of coffee. I took a sip to make sure the temperature was right, and then poured the second one for her. "Did you listen to them?" I asked, handing her the steaming mug. Caroline took the cup with both hands, soaking up the heat of the ceramic. She shook her head slowly, staring down at the dark liquid. "No, and I'm not going to. It's always the exact same thing. First he yells, then he threatens, then he cries, and at the end he blames me for everything, so I end up apologising for things he messed up. I know the cycle by heart, Mum. I don't want to hear it anymore." I nodded in silence. The clarity in her voice filled me with quiet pride. The spell was broken. At 9:30 we left for the bank. "Caroline, Robert is waiting for me in his office before they open the doors to the public. I want you to come with me. Not to defend me, but so you can hear with your own ears what the paperwork has to say. Numbers don't lie, they don't manipulate, and they don't throw tantrums." "I'm coming with you," she answered without missing a beat. We finished breakfast with the calm of people prepping for a heavy workday. I dressed carefully. I put on classic cut black dress pants, a crisp white blouse, and my dark grey coat. I brushed my hair in front of the bathroom mirror, making absolutely sure not a single white hair was out of place. Appearances in the world of numbers and institutions are the first line of defence. If you walk in looking like a victim, they treat you like a victim. If you walk in looking like an auditor, they hand you the ledgers. I packed my hardbound notebook and my ID into my stiff black leather purse. We walked out the door at 9:15. The morning air hit our faces, clearing away any leftover sleepiness. We walked the 10 blocks to the main avenue. The town was already up and running. Metal security gates on the storefronts rolled up with a clatter. Delivery trucks double parked, and people rushed to get to work. Nobody paid us any mind. We were just an older woman and her daughter walking down the sidewalk, invisible to the eyes of the world. Exactly how I liked to operate. We arrived at the bank branch at 9:30. The tinted glass doors for the general public were locked, and a small group of retirees was already lined up on the sidewalk, waiting to cash their checks. I didn't join them. I walked over to the side service door, the one used by the armoured truck guards and senior staff. I pressed the discreet buzzer built into the granite wall. A few seconds later, the door popped open with an electronic buzz. A private security guard in a spotless uniform, hand resting near his radio, poked his head out. "Good morning. The branch opens at 10, ma'am," he said with automatic politeness, ready to shut the door in our faces. "Good morning. I'm Gloria. Manager Vance is expecting me." The guard blinked, checked a small notepad he pulled from his shirt pocket, and his whole attitude shifted instantly. He opened the door all the way, stepping aside. "Come on in, Miss Gloria. Mr. Vance let me know you were coming. I'll escort you upstairs." We stepped into the empty bank. The contrast with the noise on the street was absolute. Inside, the AC held a steady chill, and the only sound was the hum of computers booting up and the scattered clicking of tellers prepping their stations. We walked across the polished marble floor, passing rows of empty waiting chairs, until we reached the spiral staircase leading up to the management offices. We climbed the stairs. Caroline trailed behind me, eyeing everything with a bit of apprehension. To her, the bank had always been hostile territory, a place where they told her her account was overdrawn, or that her husband's credit card had been declined. To me, this was my home turf. It was the exact same language of spreadsheets and balance sheets I spoke for 35 years at the co-op. Robert's office was at the end of the hall. It had glass walls that let you look out over the entire ground floor of the bank. It was a strategic position of absolute control. Robert was sitting behind his mahogany desk, reading a blue folder. When he saw us walking up, he stood immediately buttoning the jacket of his tailored grey suit and stepped out to greet us. "Gloria, it's wonderful to see you, despite the circumstances," he said, shaking my hand with firmness and deep respect. His face held the exact same professional gravity I had taught him to cultivate when he was just a kid. "Good morning, Robert. Thank you for seeing us so early. This is my daughter, Caroline." Robert shook Caroline's hand with a warm smile meant to put her at ease. "A pleasure, Caroline. Please come in and sit down. I ordered coffee. It should be here any second." We stepped into the office. The room smelled of printed paper, fresh ink, and clean leather. We sat in the two chairs facing the desk. Robert returned to his seat, pushed the glass door shut, and opened the blue folder he had been reading. He slid it gently across the wooden surface until it sat right in front of me. "This is the official report from the Central Network's Cybersecurity Department, issued last night at 8 p.m, Robert explained, folding his hands on the desk. "Just as you suspected, Gloria, the maneuver was clumsy and left tracks everywhere. The system logged access to your pension account from an IP address tied to a mobile network device registered under the name Derek Vance." I opened the folder. The pages were packed with code, serial numbers, and timestamps, but right in the middle of the paper was a light grey highlighted box summarising the transaction. I didn't need my reading glasses to read the number. $10 USD. Exactly $10 transferred at 1:45 p.m. on Sunday. I turned the folder so Caroline could see it. My daughter looked down at the paper. Her eyes scanned the printed lines. She saw her husband's name. She saw the exact time. The exact moment Derek was supposedly configuring the phone for my own good. Physical evidence stamped by a financial institution carries a crushing weight. It obliterates excuses and emotional manipulation in an instant. "This is an official document, Caroline," I told her quietly, never taking my eyes off her. "This isn't my opinion. It's not your mother exaggerating. This is what he did behind your back and behind mine." Caroline swallowed hard. She traced the edge of the paper with her index finger, like she needed to touch the proof to convince herself it was real. "What happens now, Robert?" my daughter asked, looking up at the manager with a firmness that pleasantly surprised me. Robert leaned back in his chair, shifting into his most institutional posture. "The Level 3 protocol freezes absolutely everything, Caroline. The Federal Reserve, under elder protection regulations, locks down the funds of the suspect device owner to prevent the stolen money from being laundered or converted into crypto assets. Derek Vance cannot pull cash from an ATM. He cannot swipe his credit cards. He cannot transfer balances from his digital wallets. He is completely isolated from the national financial system. And he could go to jail for this, she pressed, her voice steady. That depends entirely on your mother. The bank has already forwarded the automated report to the Cybercrimes District Attorney. It's a mandatory procedure. The DA will subpoena Gloria in the next few days. If she testifies that the transfer was made without her consent, the case moves to criminal court for attempted fraud and identity theft. If she claims it was a family mistake or a misunderstanding, the case gets dropped, though your husband's accounts will still take weeks to unlock due to internal bureaucratic red tape. I looked at Robert. He held my gaze. We both knew I wasn't dropping any charges. I hadn't come here to forgive. I had come to lock the cage. It was 10 minutes to 10 in the morning. A bank employee stepped into the office carrying a tray with 3 mugs of steaming coffee and glasses of mineral water. We thanked her quietly. I picked up my mug by the porcelain handle, feeling the comforting heat. I walked over to the glass wall of the office and looked down at the ground floor. At 10 o'clock on the dot, the main metal security gates rolled up with a heavy rumble, and the glass doors swung wide open. People started walking in, forming neat lines in front of the tellers and filling the chairs in the waiting area. The usual hum of a bank on a Monday morning filled the room. And then I saw him walk in. Derek pushed through the bank doors like a cornered animal. He looked pathetic. He was wearing the same plaid shirt from Sunday, now completely wrinkled and stained with sweat under the arms and down the back. His hair was greasy, plastered to his forehead, and he had deep, dark bags under his eyes, the dead giveaway of a sleepless night, probably spent crashing in the reclining seat of his SUV. He walked with fast, erratic steps, looking around with a mix of rage and pure desperation. He headed straight for the ATM lobby, shoving past a young kid who was waiting his turn. He yanked a plastic card from his wallet and jammed it into the slot violently. He punched in his PIN. From up in Robert's office, I couldn't see the screen, but I didn't need to. I watched Derek slam his closed fist against the metal keypad. The machine spat his card right back out, firing off a sharp, high-pitched rejection beep. "He's here," I announced, never taking my eyes off the glass. Caroline stood up from her chair and walked over to stand beside me. Seeing the state her husband was in, she let out a heavy sigh. But she didn't make a single move to go down and help him. Down below, Derek didn't give up. He took long strides toward the customer service desks, completely ignoring the ticket dispenser for the waiting queue. He planted himself right in front of the desk of one of the account officers, a young woman who was helping an older couple. "I need my accounts unlocked right now," Derek yelled. His voice bounced off the walls of the ground floor, making dozens of heads turn to stare at him. Dead silence dropped over the waiting room, broken only by the echo of his demand. "The ATM is rejecting my card. I have auto drafts hitting today." The account officer looked at him calmly, used to dealing with upset clients, though Derek's aggression was completely out of line. "Sir, please lower your voice. You need to pull a number and wait your turn." "I am not waiting for any turn. I'm a VIP client at this bank. I have investments. Get the manager out here. This is theft," he bellowed, slamming his open palm on the wooden desk. The 2 retirees sitting across from the officer shrank back into their chairs, terrified. The security guard by the entrance started walking toward Derek, resting his hand on the radio clipped to his belt. It was time. The stage was set, the lights were on, and the audience was in their seats. I turned to Robert. "I think it's time the manager attended to his VIP client," I said with an irony so razor-thin it could cut the air. Robert nodded, stepped out of the office, walked over to the staircase railing, and looked down. "Mr. Vance," Robert called out. His manager voice, deep and commanding, cut across the open space of the bank, freezing the security guard in his tracks. I must ask you to stop disturbing the peace in the public lobby. If you have an issue with your accounts, come up to my office immediately. Derek snapped his head up. Seeing the branch manager, his face seemed to light up for a fraction of a second, with the false hope that he was going to be treated with the privileges he thought he deserved. He adjusted the collar of his wrinkled shirt, shot a disgusted look at the account officer, and marched toward the spiral staircase with long, arrogant strides. He took the stairs 2 at a time. Robert waited for him at the office door. "Come in, Vance. We have a lot to talk about," Robert said, stepping aside to let him through. Derek crossed the threshold of the office, gearing up to launch into his speech of complaints and legal threats. He opened his mouth to start screaming, but the words jammed in his throat. He froze, dead in his tracks, 6 feet from the door. Caroline and I were sitting in the chairs facing the desk. I was holding my coffee mug with both hands, leaning comfortably against the backrest. My daughter sat right beside me, back straight, eyes locked, dead ahead. Derek's arrogance crumbled into dust, instantly replaced by absolute panic. He looked at Robert, then at me, then at Caroline, trying to process the perfect ambush he had just walked right into. What are you doing here?" he stammered, taking a step backward, bumping his shoulders against the glass door Robert had just pulled shut. "We came to check on my accounts, Derek," I answered with glacial calm. "Like you told me yesterday, the world changed. Everything is digital now. And since I'm just an old woman who barely knows how to turn on the TV, I figured the best thing to do was come straight to the manager so he could explain how these modern platforms work." Derek swallowed so hard his Adam's apple bobbed in his throat. The colour drained completely from his face. He was trapped in a glass box in full view of the entire bank, with the manager who held the power to ruin him and the woman he had tried to rob. "This is insane," he muttered, looking at Robert, desperate for an out. "Vance, listen to me. This is a family misunderstanding. My mother-in-law blew things out of proportion. I was just setting up her phone to help her with her bills. It was a system glitch. You have to lift this hold. I slept on the street last night because I couldn't even pay for a motel. I don't have enough cash to buy a cup of coffee." Robert walked over to his desk, stood behind his chair, and planted both hands on the polished wood, leaning slightly forward. His posture was that of a judge about to read a sentence. "The Federal Reserve System doesn't make family mistakes, Vance," Robert said, his voice hard and strictly professional. "You attempted to link a pensioner's checking account to a personal digital wallet without authorization, and you executed a test transfer. That is called identity theft and attempted fraud. And considering the victim is a senior citizen, the law treats it as an aggravated offence." "There was no fraud," Derek squeaked, the sheer desperation shattering his tough guy act completely. "It was $10. You can't ruin my life over $10. Caroline, tell them. For the love of God, tell them I warned you. I was doing this to help us." Derek took a step toward his wife, holding his hands out like he was begging. It was pathetic. The man who yesterday felt like he owned the world in my living room was now begging for mercy in a bank office, wearing the exact same dirty clothes he had slept in. Caroline didn't flinch. She didn't look down at the floor like she used to. She looked him dead in the eyes with a coldness she inherited from me, and that she was finally putting to use. "I'm not going to defend you, Derek," my daughter said. Her voice was low but crystal clear, unshaken. "I've spent 10 years defending you from your own failures. I've spent 10 years paying off your debts and swallowing your abuse in silence. Yesterday, you crossed a line you can't come back from. You tried to rob my mother right to her face. So no, I'm not going to tell them anything. You're going to have to clean up this mess all by yourself." The impact of Caroline's words was devastating. Derek grabbed his head, pulling at his thinning hair, gasping for air like the oxygen had just been sucked out of the office. I used the silence to land my hit. A calculated, measured strike, handing every insult and every humiliation right back to him with perfect symmetry. I set the coffee mug down on the desk with a soft clink of porcelain. I settled back into my chair, smoothed out invisible wrinkles on my black slacks, and stared right at him. "The economy is wrecked, Derek," I said, using the exact same words he had preached at my dining table on Sunday, with the exact same smug tone. "You have to know how to move. But let's be real, your methods barely cover the basics anymore. And with your accounts frozen, your money is literally worth nothing." Derek stared at me in absolute terror. He recognized his own quotes. He recognized the poison he himself had pumped into my house, now shooting straight back into his own veins. "I told you I didn't need help with my bank account," I continued, relentless. "But you insisted the mental burden was too much for me." "Well, Derek, I'm freeing you from that mental burden. Starting today, I will manage your financial future. I will decide when I drop the charges with the DA. I will decide when you get access to your cards back. And in the meantime, I promise you, you'll never have to worry about going to the ATM for cash, because you won't be able to pull out a single dime. If you need cash for groceries, maybe Caroline will give you a little weekly allowance. If you behave." The word allowance hung heavy in the manager's office. Crushing. It was the exact concept he had used to reduce me to a helpless child, now weaponized to seal his absolute ruin. "You're a monster," Derek whispered, backing up until he hit the glass wall again. The people down on the ground floor were looking up, watching the silent movie of a cornered man. "No, Derek, I'm just a 72-year-old grandmother who writes her passwords down in a hard-bound notebook." "And you're the financial expert who just lost everything because you didn't know who you were stealing from." Robert slammed the blue folder shut with a sharp crack that sounded like a gavel. "Vance Bank Security is about to escort you out the door," the manager announced, pointing toward the exit. "Your accounts will remain frozen indefinitely until the district attorney issues a ruling. If you attempt to enter another branch of this network to cause a scene, we will call the police immediately. I suggest you find yourself a good criminal defense attorney. If you can find one who works for free, get out of my office." Derek didn't argue. He didn't yell. All the fight had drained out of his body entirely. He was hollowed out, humiliated in front of his wife, in front of the branch manager, and in front of every single customer watching from the ground floor. He dropped his head, pushed the glass door open with shaking hands, and walked out into the hallway. We watched him walk down the spiral staircase, slowly dragging his feet, with the security guard tailing him 2 steps behind. He walked out the main bank doors and vanished into the street, swallowed by the city, turned into a ghost without a penny to his name. Silence returned to the office. Caroline let out the breath she had been holding and wiped her face with her hands, scrubbing away the cold sweat of pure tension. "It's over, Mum," she said with a mix of total exhaustion and profound relief. I pulled my hard-bound ledger from my purse, flipped to a blank page, and took out a black ink pen. "Not quite yet, sweetheart," I replied, writing today's date in the top right corner of the page. "Now we have to coordinate how you're going to get your things out of that apartment before the sun goes down. We have a lot of work to do, and the week is just getting started." I slid the black pen into the inside pocket of my purse and snapped the hard-bound ledger shut with a firm motion. The sound of the heavy cardboard slapping together was the only signal that the meeting was officially over. Robert Vance watched us from across his mahogany desk. His posture was still strictly professional, but there was a gleam of deep respect in his eyes. The exact same respect he showed me when I used to walk into his office 20 years ago to audit the co-op's agricultural loans. I stood up from the chair, smoothing the creases of my dark slacks. Caroline did the same beside me. My daughter wasn't shaking anymore. Watching her husband beg for mercy and get marched out by bank security had acted like a fast-acting antidote to the fear that had paralyzed her for the last decade. "Thank you for your time, Robert," I told him, extending my hand across the desk, "and for acting with the speed the situation demanded. Institutions only work when the people running them have the spine to enforce the rules without exceptions. Robert shook my hand firmly. His grip was warm and steady. You have nothing to thank me for, Gloria. You taught me that numbers are the only defense against con artists. The bank's legal department will maintain the Level 3 lockdown until the DA issues their ruling. Derek Vance won't be able to move a single cent, not even to buy a bus ticket. I'll mail a certified copy of the cybersecurity report to your house, just in case you need it for any further paperwork. That sounds perfect. Have an excellent week. We walked out of the manager's office and headed for the spiral staircase. From the top, I took one last look down at the ground floor of the bank. The teller lines were moving normally. The clatter of keyboards and dot matrix printers filled the air, and the security guard was back at his post by the front door. The disruption Derek had tried to cause had already been absorbed and neutralized by the institutional machine. He was a discarded problem. A calculation error the system had already purged. We walked down the marble steps and stepped out onto the street. The cold morning air hit us with an invigorating slap. The sun had climbed a little higher, lighting up the tops of the oak trees along the avenue, but the chill of the coming winter still cut to the bone. We walked in silence for half a block, putting distance between us and the tinted glass doors of the bank. "Mum," Caroline said, breaking the silence, her voice still a little raspy. "When you said we had to coordinate getting my stuff out of the apartment, were you serious? Like today?" I stopped at the corner right next to the cab stand and turned to face her. Her eyes showed a mix of anxiety and urgency. Half measures are what parasites feed on, Caroline. Derek walked out of that bank with no money, no cards, and no dignity. His very first instinct will be to seek shelter in the only place he still thinks he holds power, your apartment. He's going to try and barricade himself in. He'll try to use your things, your clothes, your furniture as hostages to force you to negotiate. We are not giving him that chance. By the time he manages to find someone to loan him bus fare to get back, you will not be there. I reached into my leather purse and pulled out the old cell phone, the rugged brick with physical buttons I had used yesterday to call Robert. I scrolled through the contacts saved on the internal memory, clicking through the names patiently. I found the number I was looking for. Earl, a former driver. A guy who now ran private moving jobs using an old but flawlessly maintained classic Ford F150. I hit the green call button and held the brick to my ear. It rang twice. "Miss Gloria?" Earl's deep, gravelly voice answered, backed by the rumble of an idling engine. "Good morning, Earl. I need an emergency hauling job right now. It's a quick run, just boxes, suitcases and clothes. No heavy furniture, no appliances. Are you available?" "For you always, ma'am. I'm dropping off a load at the lumberyard down by the highway, but I'll be done in 10. Just tell me where I'm heading." I gave him the address to Caroline's apartment, a 3-story brick walk-up about 20 blocks from downtown. We agreed on an hourly rate, and I hung up. I dropped the phone back into my purse and waved down the first cab in the line. "Get in, sweetheart. We have work to do." The cab ride was short. Caroline stared out the window, looking at the streets of her own city like she was seeing them for the very first time. We pulled up to the exposed brick building. I paid the fare using small bills I always keep in a separate coin purse. We stepped out of the car and stood in front of the tempered glass front door. Caroline pulled her keychain from the pocket of her grey sweater. Her hands weren't shaking. She slid the key into the lock, turned the cylinder, and pushed the door open. We climbed the stairs to the second floor. The hallway was dim lit, only by a tiny window at the far end of the corridor. When we unlocked the apartment door, a stale smell hit us. It was a mix of the expensive, overly sweet cologne Derek wore too much of, combined with the smell of closed windows and unwashed laundry. The place was exactly as they had left it on Sunday morning. The bed was unmade, a pair of leather dress shoes was tossed in the middle of the living room, and a dirty coffee mug sat on the coffee table. "Grab the suitcases from the closet, Caroline, and find some heavy-duty trash bags for the shoes and coats. Don't waste time folding anything perfectly, just empty your shelves." My daughter nodded and headed into the master bedroom. I stayed in the living room taking in the space. The apartment was small, but Caroline had worked hard to decorate it. The curtains, the throw pillows, the framed prints on the walls. Everything had been bought with her pharmacy paychecks. Derek had only contributed a massive flat-screen TV that clashed terribly with the rest of the furniture and took up almost the entire main wall. I walked into the kitchen, opening the pantry drawers, looking for the cardboard boxes Caroline usually saved after grocery runs. I found 3 medium boxes folded flat behind the trash can. I popped them open, taping the bottoms fast with packing tape I found in a tool drawer. I carried the boxes into the bedroom. Caroline had already pulled out 2 large canvas suitcases and was tossing her clothes inside with fast, almost frantic movements. She was breathing heavy. She was exercising 10 years of submission with every hanger she stripped. "Mum," she said, suddenly stopping dead. She was kneeling in front of the nightstand on Derek's side of the bed. She had pulled open the bottom drawer, looking for some scarves she remembered stashing there at the end of last winter. I walked over to her. Caroline was holding a thick stack of papers wrapped in a rubber band. The edges of the pages were stamped with red ink and logos from collection agencies. "What is that, sweetheart?" She handed me the stack. I adjusted my reading glasses and flipped through the documents. The first page was an eviction notice from the law firm managing the building. It was dated 3 weeks ago. It cited 4 consecutive months of unpaid HOA fees, piled on top of 3 months of unpaid rent. The second paper was a repossession notice from the car dealership. It demanded the immediate surrender of Derek's SUV for defaulting on 6 straight payments, warning that the vehicle already had an active repo order filed in commercial court. Caroline covered her mouth with both hands. Her eyes filled with tears, but this time they were tears of pure cleansing rage. "He asked me for the money every month, Mum. He told me he was going to pay the rent and the fees in cash because the leasing office gave him a discount. He took half my paycheck to cover the SUV payment. He kept it all. We were going to get evicted next week, and he didn't tell me a thing." I looked at the paperwork. The proof of the disaster was absolute. Derek wasn't just a loudmouth chasing magic investments. He was a domestic con artist who had been leeching off his own wife until he pushed her right to the edge of legal homelessness. I folded the papers carefully and slid them into the pocket of my slacks. "Listen to me closely, Caroline," I told her, taking her face in both hands, forcing her to look me in the eyes. "This is the very last time you are going to cry over this man's lies. Do you understand me? The last time. These papers are the ultimate proof that leaving this house isn't abandoning your home. It's an emergency evacuation. Now pack your things, leave his shirts, leave his shoes, leave his TV, take absolutely nothing but what you bought with the sweat of your own brow." She nodded, wiping her tears away with the sleeve of her sweater. The rage gave her a massive surge of new energy. In less than 40 minutes, we had stuffed 2 suitcases, 3 cardboard boxes, and 4 heavy-duty trash bags, with all her clothes, her books, her toiletries, and the few items of sentimental value she owned. The raspy honk of Earl's Ford F-150 echoed from the street. I peeked out the window. The beat-up, reliable truck was double-parked, with its hazards flashing. We carried everything down in 3 trips. Earl helped us load the bags and boxes into the truck bed, stacking them with the exact same precision he used to stack seed bags in the co-op warehouses. He didn't ask a single question. Men of his generation know how to read a room without needing an explanation. Before pulling the apartment door shut for the last time, Caroline stopped in the threshold. She looked at the empty space, the open closets, the unmade bed. She pulled her keyring from her pocket, weighed the keys in her hand for a second, and walked over to the coffee table in the living room. She dropped the keys on the wood right next to Derek's dirty coffee mug. She stepped out into the hallway and pulled the door shut hard. The deadbolt snapped into place with a sharp, final metallic clank. We climbed into the cab of Earl's truck. The engine roared to life and we drove away from the building. I looked at my daughter out of the corner of my eye. She was staring out the window, but this time there was no anxiety on her face. There was an immense peace. The peace of someone who just dropped a cinder block they've been carrying on their back for years. Time, once you clear out the emotional garbage, starts moving with stunning clarity. The following weeks were an exercise in methodical rebuilding. Caroline settled back into her childhood bedroom. At first, she slept 12 hours straight, clawing back the rest that nervous tension had robbed from her for years. Then, slowly, she started getting her routines back. She went back to work at the pharmacy without the crushing pressure of handing her paycheck over to a husband who vaporized it. She started buying groceries for the house, cooking with me on the weekends, getting the colour back in her cheeks and the spark back in her voice. Derek vanished from our immediate orbit. But in a big town where everyone knows everyone, failure makes just as much noise as fake success. One afternoon, almost 3 weeks after the showdown at the bank, I walked down to the newsstand on Main Street to buy the Sunday paper. Arthur was behind the metal counter organising some candy bars. When he saw me walking up, his eyes lit up with that specific spark of a man sitting on fresh intel he desperately needs to share. "Good afternoon, Gloria. Great to see you," he greeted me, leaning his elbows on the counter and dropping his voice instinctively. "You know who I saw yesterday afternoon?" "Good afternoon, Arthur. Judging by your tone, I'd say someone who isn't doing too well." Arthur let out a dry bark of a laugh. "Your son-in-law, Derek, or ex-son-in-law, I should say. I saw him at the gas station out by the highway near the toll booth. I was filling up my boy's car. The kid looked like a wreck. He was on foot, wearing a filthy jacket, shoes completely blown out. Turns out he tried to buy a bag of coffee and a soda inside the convenience store. He tried to pay with his phone using one of those modern apps. The machine declined him 3 times. The cashier told him his account was flagged as frozen by court order. I didn't act surprised. I pulled out exact change for the newspaper and set the bills on the counter. Financial institutions are ruthless when they catch irregularities, Arthur. Ruthless is an understatement, Gloria. The pump attendant told me that last week a tow truck showed up with a commercial court order and repoed that massive SUV he drove. They found him sleeping in the back seat, parked in a dirt lot out by the city impound. They made him get out with nothing but the clothes on his back and towed the truck for default. Now folks are saying he's sleeping on an air mattress on the floor of a buddy's auto shop because the cops threw him out of the apartment he was renting for not paying the HOA fees. I nodded slowly. Derek's financial collapse was the natural consequence of a castle built entirely on lies, maxed out credit cards, and other people's money. The second I cut off his access to my pension, the only source of actual liquid cash he had his hands on, the castle collapsed right on his head. I didn't feel pity. I felt the deep calm of someone watching gravity work exactly as it should. "You reap what you sow, Arthur. Keep the change." I started the walk back home with the Sunday paper tucked under my arm. The very next day, the mailman dropped a heavy brown envelope in my mailbox. It was an official subpoena from the district attorney's office. The automated cybersecurity report had churned through the bureaucratic pipeline, and the DA on duty required me to come in and formally ratify the charges for attempted fraud and identity theft. I showed up at the courthouse on a Tuesday morning. The building was ancient, with peeling paint on the walls and hardwood floors that groaned under my shoes. The smell of old paper ink pads and burnt coffee triggered the third recurring memory of my past. A crystal-clear flashback to my early days at the co-op, when Richard, my husband, was still alive. I remembered how he rode down to County Hall with me once to file a formal complaint against a building inspector who was demanding bribes to permit a new storage barn. I was nervous, second-guessing if I should hand over our ledgers. Richard put a heavy, warm hand on my shoulder and said, "Gloria, documented truth is a brick wall. Liars can scream all they want, but they're just going to crack their own skulls open if they try to run through it. Show your paperwork." That memory was my shield while I waited in the courthouse hallway. They called me into a cramped office stacked floor to ceiling with case files. The DA, a guy in his 50s with glasses sliding down his nose, looked at me over his folders. Miss Gloria, we're here regarding the cybersecurity report from the Federal Reserve. The system flagged that a device registered to Derek Vance attempted to link your pension account and executed an unauthorized transfer. Mr. Vance submitted a statement through a public defender claiming it was a family mistake, an attempt to help you with technology that you blew out of proportion. Are you ratifying that this was an attempted fraud without your consent? I didn't hesitate for a single second. I pulled the hardbound ledger from my purse, flipped it open to the page where my original passwords were logged, and pulled out the certified copy of the report Robert Vance had mailed me. Mr. District Attorney, I was the treasurer of an agricultural co-op for 35 years. I managed payroll for 100 employees and balanced million-dollar sheets. I do not blow technology or numbers out of proportion. Mr. Vance took my cell phone from me by physical force in my own home, changed my security credentials in a gross violation of my privacy, and established a financial bridge to his personal account with the intent to drain my funds. It was not a mistake. It was premeditated theft. I am ratifying the charges in full. The DA looked me dead in the eye. He saw the ice in my posture, the absolute clarity in my voice, and the flawless documentation I laid out on his desk. He nodded, picked up a pen, and signed the ratification document. We will proceed with a formal indictment for aggravated financial fraud, ma'am. The defendant's bank accounts will remain under a hard freeze until the trial concludes. Have a good day. I walked out of the courthouse with the absolute certainty that the padlock was snapped shut forever. 6 months passed since that morning at the bank. Winter faded away, making room for a bright spring that made the lemon tree in the backyard explode with green leaves. The Sunday routine in my house went right back to what it had always been, but with one vital difference. The tension was gone, replaced by a harmony you could literally breathe in the air. It was a Sunday at noon. Sunlight was pouring through the kitchen window. I was sitting at the head of the table watching Caroline. My daughter was standing at the counter prepping the rub for the roast. She chopped the garlic and parsley with quick, practiced hands, pouring the olive oil with perfect measure. She was wearing a white apron, her hair tied back. Her posture was straight, her face was completely relaxed, and she was humming along to an old song playing quietly on the radio. A month ago, using the cash she had managed to save by not paying Derek's debts, Caroline had bought herself a used car. A compact, economical model with a few scratches on the paint, but it ran perfectly. The car keys sat on the table next to the flower vase, shining like a trophy of her reclaimed independence. She didn't have to ride the bus for 2 hours in the rain anymore. She didn't have to ask anyone's permission to go anywhere. "Mum, should I put a little rosemary on the potatoes?" Caroline asked, turning to me with a smile. "Put it on, sweetheart. Rosemary gives roasted potatoes a rustic kick that works perfectly." Lunch passed in absolute peace. There were no obnoxiously loud engines revving on the street. There were no doors flying open. There were no complaints about the heat and no empty speeches about magic investments. We ate the tender roast. We talked about the pharmacy inventory and the tomato seedlings we were going to plant in the garden next week. After lunch, Caroline took care of the dishes. I stood up from the table, kissed her on the forehead, and retreated to my bedroom. The house was quiet. A protective, heavy and kind silence. I stepped into my room. The afternoon sun lit up the dust motes floating in the air. I walked over to the heavy oak wardrobe, pulled the heavy door open and reached for the old shoebox tucked behind the winter blankets. The box that smelled of mothballs and locked away time. I sat on the edge of my bed with the box in my lap. I lifted the worn cardboard lid. Inside rested my original ID, the gold debit card to my secret account, and my hardbound ledger. I pulled the ledger out, reached into my coat pocket, and found the black ink pen I always carry with me. I opened the book, flipping to the back section. the pages where I used to log unexpected expenses and problems that needed solving. I turned the pages slowly, listening to the rough scrape of the paper. I reached the page where 6 months ago I had written the name Derek Vance, followed by the date of that disastrous Sunday, and the word problem. I stared at the page for a few seconds. I heard the water running in the kitchen, the dull clink of clean plates being stacked in the drying rack by my daughter's hands. The hands of a free woman. I clicked the pen open, pressed the ballpoint to the paper, and with a firm, slow, and absolutely flawless motion, I drew a thick, black, horizontal line, crossing out my ex-son-in-law's name from one side to the other. I blew on the wet ink for a second. I shut the hard-bound ledger, dropped it back into the shoebox, laid the gold card right on top, and put the lid back on. I stood up from the bed. I slid the box onto the top shelf, hiding it behind the blankets, and pulled the oak door shut. The brass latch clicked into place with a sharp, dry snap. A small, perfect sound, sealing the matter forever in the quiet of my room. This story serves as a poignant reminder that true strength and wisdom are often hidden behind the quiet, steady rhythm of a well-lived life. It teaches us that resilience is not measured by the volume of our voice or the display of external power, but by our unwavering command over our own boundaries and principles. In a world that often prizes flashiness and digital dominance, the narrative illustrates that the foundation of a meaningful life rests on the quiet virtues of integrity, patience, and self-respect. When we face manipulation, the most powerful response is often a calm refusal to participate in the chaos. By refusing to be reduced, we preserve our autonomy and demonstrate that our worth is non-negotiable. Ultimately, true liberation comes when we courageously cut ties with toxicity, allowing ourselves to rebuild on the solid ground of our own identity and values. Personal commentary. Human dignity is not something that can be stripped away by arrogance. It is an internal fortress that we maintain through every choice we make. I have always believed that the most effective way to confront entitlement is through the quiet, precise application of truth and standard protocol. There is a profound, almost surgical power in remaining calm while those around us lose their composure in pursuit of deceit. We often underestimate the quiet wisdom held by those who have lived through the full spectrum of life's challenges. It is easy to mistake gentleness for weakness, but the person who remains composed under fire is the one who truly holds the reins. Boundaries are not just suggestions. They are the necessary architecture of a healthy life, and we are responsible for their enforcement. When we stop trying to fix others and focus on protecting our own peace, we shift the entire dynamic of our relationships. Vulnerability is a choice, not a mandate, and it should be reserved for those who have earned our trust through consistent action. True success is never found in the exploitation of others, but in the internal security of knowing who we are and what we will no longer tolerate. Watching a character reclaim their narrative is a reminder that it is never too late to draw a line in the sand. Wisdom is the ability to see a trap before the bait is even set and to walk away with one's integrity intact. We define our own value, and no external force, no matter how loud or threatening, has the right to dictate our worth. Silence is often our greatest weapon, providing the space for us to think clearly and act decisively. Let this serve as a testament to the fact that peace of mind is the ultimate asset, one that should never be sacrificed for the sake of appearances. Disclaimer. This story is a work of fiction, created for educational and entertainment purposes. It explores themes of interpersonal conflict, financial boundary setting, and personal growth. Any resemblance to real persons, living or dead, or actual events is purely coincidental. It is not intended to provide legal, financial, or professional advice. Readers are encouraged to consult with qualified professionals regarding their own personal or financial circumstances.